Hello, everyone. This is episode number 11 with little different guests than usual with Timothy Riffe, the owner and AI consultant at Unified Software Solutions, where we talk about navigating AI in GTM. This podcast is sponsored by the GTM AI Academy, your go-to resource for learning how to leverage AI in go-to-market teams and individual roles. You can find this episode on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, and more. For more, go to gtmaiacademy.com. Let's dive in. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. This is Coach K with the GTM AI Podcast. I am very pleased and excited to have Timothy with me. Timothy, so good to have you. You're a little bit different than most of my guests in a good way because you lean more towards the actual creation of AI products and solutions for people and getting them involved. So I'm really excited to kind of nerd out a little bit and see what you see on the other side. So to start us off, I'd love to have you introduce yourself. Tell us about you, where you kind of came from, your past history, and where you are, where you are now.
Awesome. Sounds great. Yeah, so I started my career as a Marine a long time ago.
Yeah.
Spent 8 years in the Marine Corps doing various things as a machine gunner, water survival instructor, martial arts instructor, and then they sent me on recruiting duty. That's when I decided that it was about time for me to transition back into go back to school. So
Nice.
After that, I went back to school, got a degree in business, transferred around a little bit, went to a couple of community colleges and then University of Minnesota. Finally finished up at the University of Phoenix with a business degree. But then I kept learning, kept taking classes online, things like that. At that point, I was in the financial services world. So I was a financial advisor, managed at the end of my run as an advisor, I was managing about $35 million portfolio with JP Morgan. And then I opened my own consulting firm and decided to start creating software. And so about 7 years ago is when I really started to focus on machine learning and AI. It fascinated me, the potential. And so that's kind of what led me into this area, is just the potential I see with what we can do, what we can accomplish using this type of technology.
So now you're in a place of literally building out. So let me make sure I can clarify this for the people listening. So you help to build AI products, or more to how to implement inside of someone's solution? Like, what do you do exactly for people?
Great question. So I do a couple things. One, with our startup that I have right now, we are actually building an AI mentor. On the consulting side, I work with companies. I consult with them to implement AI solutions depending on what they're trying to accomplish. So we go through and usually end up starting with discussing, where they're at, figuring out a process and a step-by-step solution on how to implement. Because a lot of times there's a lot of interest, but not a lot of understanding, sometimes because of misinformation or overhype, if you will. And so, a lot of times business owners think it's going to be a lot easier and quicker than it is.
Right.
Because you can go online and you can see, oh, well, I just made this chatbot. It took me, a couple days or whatever. And it's true, you can make these things in a couple days, but they're not really business ready. You can make them for yourself, but they're not necessarily ready for customer facing due to, risk and things like that. And you don't want your business looking stupid because it doesn't perform appropriately, So on the consulting side, that's what I do. I work with companies to help them not only implement, but get ready to implement and then implement those solutions. So, yeah.
That's awesome. You're the guy that when we met, I was really grateful, because there's sometimes where I go in, I handle more of the change management or enablement of existing AI tools, but not so much the creation of your own solution or bolting on one or whatever. So that's not my expertise, So when they ask me, I'm like, I'm not the guy. Tim's the guy. I'm not the guy. I can help you with how to implement different AI functions or tools, do a gap analysis and what is there to use what's already out there commercially ready. But to build it from your own, I'm not that type of guy. So I'm really grateful you're around, so I can just start sending people your way. Like, go talk to Timothy. I have no idea how to do that.
Perfect.
So with you, one thing we talked about before we had the meeting was just like, what do people get wrong? What do leaders get wrong when they start talking about, I want to bolt on an AI to my current solution, or I want to implement it somehow into what we're doing with customers or something? Like, what do most people get wrong besides, the misunderstanding how much time it can take?
Yeah, so there's a few things that will come up. One thing is right now you either have a big mistrust from some that, they don't understand it, don't trust it, don't are
Right.
kind of nervous about it, or you have the ones that, think it can do anything and everything and it's really easy, you know.
Yeah.
And so first things first is kind of getting rid of those misconceptions and really looking at, okay, what can we do with this AI and what can we not do with it? Because it is a tool. It's not a one-stop solution that solves everything,
Right.
you
Right.
know. Um, so some other things that just generally in some smaller businesses I've worked with are not thought of ahead of time is like where their data is stored. You have to have a lot of times data management is kind of the first part of the process,
Right.
data management, data governance, all that kind of stuff, getting it set up so we can actually train these models that are going to be useful in your business.
Hmm.
Because without proper data, the model's only going to be as good as your data is, the
Right.
accuracy of the data.
Right.
It can't, if you put a bunch of random data in there, it's not going to be very accurate or specific. And you can go around and say that you use AI, but it's not, you're not getting the full benefit out of it.
Right.
And so those are some of the things that I see a lot of is they're not necessarily at the point where we can just implement, even if it's something as simple as like you were talking about, maybe implementing a chatbot that's basically just chat GPT on the back end onto their site. So those are some of the things that you have to look into. And then also, of course, what are you looking to accomplish with this? And
Right.
is it going to be worth it for the size of your business? Because it is a costly undertaking if it's not going to really add, if it's not going to cut cost enough to, make sense for that expense and that time, then, maybe that's not the right way to go. Because sometimes it is overkill
Right.
for
So
certain
when
things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to double click in the data for a second. I think it's important because there's two different versions. There's one where you build your own AI
Mhm.
capabilities on top of data that's specific to you. And then there's bolting on, quote unquote, an API from Claude, whatever, ChatGPT, and
Sure.
pointing that at that data and then extrapolating what you can from it. So can you
Yeah.
give me some examples? Like I always think I hear this thing about data and I experience AI all the time in all my life in different places from the Netflix suggestions to I have an AI that goes all of my content from decks to one pages to content there. And then there's AI for my conversation intelligence tools. Then there's AI for financial data. Like this, like technically, when you talk about data, what does that really come down to? What is data? And how does someone know if they
Yeah.
have something unique?
Right. So great question. And there's a lot that goes into data because all these things are data points, right? Like, when you look at like large language models and some of these things, you're taking a lot of words in plain English and as well as
Mhm.
other types of data, and you're breaking it down, tokenizing them into smaller chunks,
Right.
right? And then those become data points and stuff like that. With financial, historic financial records, those are, each one of those things is a data point. Now, here's things that I've seen speaking to that part is a lot of people I've heard in the, I don't know, last year or so talking about, using chat GPT for financial analysis and things like that.
Right.
While it may get some answers correct and things like that's not what it's designed for. Um,
Right.
there are better models out there for financial analysis. Now, I will say that I read the other day that I think it was AWS that came out with a new model that's supposed to be really good at that. I haven't played around with it at all, so I have no idea if that's
Yeah.
the case or not. But also the amount of data that you have is important because for say deep learning, for example, you have to have
Mhm.
millions and billions of data points for it to
Right.
be worthwhile, right? Because so sometimes deep learning is overkill because you don't have the amount of data.
Right.
Now, for certain things, you can create synthetic data. There are ways to do that with code. You can create synthetic data, but you have to be careful with that because it needs to be realistic numbers, of course. So that requires, and you also have to be an expert at that area so you can go through and look to make sure they didn't just, random data points that don't make any sense.
Yeah.
Then you also have to make sure that these data points are not too closely resembling real people, because you have privacy concerns and things like that.
Right.
And so there's a lot that goes into data governance, data management, data privacy, of course, right now, on how you can anonymize the data to where you're training these models, but it's not, it's anonymous for who the data is for, right?
Right.
Like,
So not my name is not attached on my
correct.
web browser history or my buying history or whatever the case might be.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
We're just using the data points. We're not, digging into your life and stuff like that in
Yeah.
a way that's not appropriate. So data really is one of it's a big deal within creating any of these solutions. And it's also a big deal when it comes to privacy concerns and all these potential future regulations that I'm sure at some point regulation will come down. And a lot of it will probably be around data.
Well, it's kind of like how the EU just passed the AI Act. I mean, that's a lot of what's
Right.
about is the data privacy and what can or cannot be accessed.
Right.
Curious and like for business owners, translating what you just said
Mhm.
to like for a business owner, most of them, at least from what my experience is, don't always think in the mindset of data. So like I've heard from many people saying that your data is your moat. And from listening to you, I'm like, okay, that means what I'm hearing is the more creative businesses can be on collecting specific types of data would mean it's unique to their product, platform, whatever the case might be.
Right.
And then therefore their AI could be more unique because it's then specific to their use case, industry,
Right.
whatever the case might be. So how would you as a business owner say, okay, I'm collecting all these data points from actual
Mhm.
sales amount to marketing content to whatever. How do you identify? You talked about before, like what's the problem you're trying to solve, but how do you identify the data you can say this could possibly be a fix for that? And we could build an AI off of this data. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, so that's a unique one kind of to obviously to each business, but it really is an important part to go through. I mean, that's kind of one of the early stages, right? Because
Yeah.
you've got to get that right. The big problem is you don't want to not collect some really important data.
Right.
You know, it's easier to drop data that's not useful than it is to go back and be like, oh, we really should have captured this,
Should have had that.
right?
Yeah.
And so it also goes with the design of the databases, the data storage, how you're managing it, all that kind of stuff,
Hmm.
as well as just kind of, I guess the start of it, the best way to describe it would be going through and thinking through the problem and really problem solving on, okay, what is affected by this, right? Like
Right.
what things affect this and what is affected by this, so we can get all the data points. And sometimes better to capture probably more than you need, because like I said, you can drop data
Yeah.
points
You
that
can whittle it
not,
down. Yeah.
yeah. But what you want to do is, because these systems work with data really quickly, and they can handle vast data sets that we can't, would take us a long time to
Right.
go through. And so oftentimes they might be able to see a correlation or a causation that we're not seeing, right?
Right.
More so correlation, it's really hard to, it's pretty much impossible to use probabilities for causation, but they can see correlations that we may not see. And so it's important to have all that data. But like you
Right.
said, you've got to capture it in a meaningful way. You've got to capture it in a way that you can utilize it, right? Like you need to have your databases set up, you need to have different data storage set up ahead of time and not just randomly gather data. You know,
Right.
I hear all the time, oh, I have, thousands of emails of data. Well,
Hmm.
we need to get out of there. That's not really helping. Yeah,
Right.
things like that. It needs to be stored properly. And so a lot of times that's the first step, is coming up with this, coming up with what we're trying to accomplish, what data points are going to be affecting this and be affected by it. And then let's figure out how we're going to store that so we can train our AI to accomplish that. Because, each database there are different databases that are more useful for training data than others,
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that's kind of the way you really have to start thinking about the data, where you're at, and then move from there, rather than starting with, oh, I want my own chat GPT or something.
Right. Timothy, I'm so sorry. My wife just called. Can I get
No,
2 minutes? Is that
yeah,
okay?
go ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
it's not that big of an emergency, so I guess we'll just have to hang on. All right. So going back to this point around data, I'm just curious. Like I'm thinking about what I'm hearing from you is like there's two sides. And I'll give you an example. I'm with a company that they have mass amounts of financial data of customers, right? Because
Sure.
we transfer through and it passes through us to kind of be reconciled through different means. So we're adding on our own AI plus kind of like complementing, I should say, with ChatGPT.
Sure.
So curious on like your thoughts around how do you identify when to build? First off, I mean, this is a two-part question. Sorry, I'll make this
Sure.
easier. What I'm hearing is part of it saying it's identifying what the end result is and then seeing what data do we have capabilities of collecting that can actually get us there. And
Right.
then that data, based on how much you actually collect at a certain time or whatever, may take a while to get the millions of data points you get to actually make it intelligent. When do you know when you're ready for either bolting one on or using your own platform with whatever data you want to use? Like when's the like go, we're ready. When do you
Great
know that?
question. So one has a lot to do with kind of there are a few things there. One has to do with scale and the kind of end result you're desiring,
Hmm.
and some of the maybe risk metrics that you're looking at, because you can do a lot um, with like using the APIs of a chat GPT or a Claude
Right.
and things, and you can fine tune these models with data. And that's not going to need as much data as trying to create one of these from scratch, and you can still add things onto it that will make it even work even better for your firm, as long as you can do it right. Like retrieval augmented generation can help. Zero shot learning's a new one. Those are pretty new. The thing with those also, though, so retrieval augmented generation allows it to kind of go back into your documents and data, if you will, and answer the question. Think of it as like remember when you used to go to the library and the librarian knew everything about all the different, where all the different books were and stuff.
Everything was. Hmm.
Right. So think of it kind of like that. The problem is, and the things you have to worry about to mitigate the risk is your data sources have to be really good, or it's just going to continue whatever poor data that you have. Right. And so an example of that might be, we see all the time on these social media platforms that people saying whatever, different ideas, some of them having absolutely zero credibility, or
Right.
any way for anyone to check, right? Because no one's ever heard of it or whatever. If you're using stuff like that, it's going to continue using it, you know what I mean? Without being able to fact check it, if you will. So you need to make sure that you're getting this data from reputable data sources, and And then these kind of things can help you create a pretty impressive solution just with, like you said, Claude or Chat GPT or some of these other ones by adding some of these little things in your data. Now, so it there are a couple things I would say to building your own. Now, if you wanted to build your own like large language model, one, it's expensive. So you're going to probably need to be a
Right.
fairly large company, because even though it's a lot cheaper now than it was, maybe a year ago, it's still going to be expensive,
Right.
and take some time. Now, on top of that, like you said, or like we were discussing, it takes tons and tons of data points, billions and billions of data points. Now, the reason a company might want to do that is they don't want their data and their customer data going into another company, like not having some trust issues with like ChatGPT or
Right.
Claude or something like that.
Right.
So it's kind of, you've got to kind of weigh that part, but it will be quite expensive. So most of the time, for things like that, I would probably recommend using some sort of language model that's already built and, enhancing it with fine tuning and retrieval augmented generation and some of these other things. And of course, you want to make sure you mitigate any risk that you see. You don't want to
Yeah.
use you don't want to be training this with customer data and stuff like that, that you need to anonymize it and stuff. So I would say most of the time it's going to be using a solution that's already created, but enhanced.
Mhm. The What it sounds like to me, like, I mean, because I'm not doing the back end stuff, I'm trying to compare it to what I'm used to. It's almost like I remember when somebody told me about Jasper when I first learned about it. I was like, it's pretty much
Mhm.
just ChatGPT, but it's fine tuned to a specific way of writing, which is Jasper, you know.
Right.
So it's almost like when you have your company, the data you have narrows the scope of whatever power behind ChatGPT and really focuses it on your specific data points or results or whatever the training is, you know,
Yes.
which I think is pretty powerful. But to your point, though, there's also power behind not using those because you don't get all the sometimes hallucinations or other data privacy things or whatever other concerns you might
Right.
have. Um, well, let's talk about more on the human side. I know we talked a lot about leaders this last time around,
Yeah.
what to expect with AI. So I'm curious from your viewpoint when you talk to, C-suite level people or VPs or whoever's leading the team. Um, what are things to be aware of from both a people lens of like adjusting to AI? Because it's such a new thing that
Yeah.
people are still wrapping their minds around. And then we think about it from a business viewpoint. So people in business.
Great question. So first, with the people aspect, I think it's really important that if we're starting to go down and implement AI solutions, regardless of whether we're building our own or if we're just enhancing a chat GPT fine-tuned model, or any of these other types of models that we could use, recommender systems, the list goes on. What you need to start with is, well, not just start with, but you start with the data, but then you also start with, at the same time, training your people to evolve their role on how their roles are going to evolve, on how they're going to work with it. Because I think it's a lot of people think, oh, these jobs are all just going to go away. Some jobs will go away, but they will evolve. So the person isn't going away. They just are now doing a different job, right? Because they no longer have to do this stuff that the AI is taking care of. Now their job role has shifted slightly. And so I think it's important to, while you're going through this, to start training your staff on how to work with the AI in the optimal way so they get the maximum productivity out of it. Because it's a tool, it's not an employee. It's a tool for the employees to use. It should help. It What it should be doing is cutting cost and increasing productivity for businesses if you're using it correctly. Oh, can't hear you.
Sorry. When I saw the Sam Altman interview that he did 4 days ago,
Yeah.
have you heard that or not? It was fascinating. And he brought up the whole jobs thing. And his answer was, I don't think we should think about it as in jobs. We should think about it as in tasks, you know?
Yeah.
So if your job is strictly just taskless, then yes, AI will probably replace that. But like
Yeah.
Most jobs have a mix of both tasks and then other things that only humans can do at this point.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see how I've shifted my thinking around that. It's like, okay, what's the 5 minute task, 5 hour task, 5 days task? What's the
Mhm.
tasks that need to be done, and how can AI kind of fit inside of that? And how do you identify that? So I'm curious with you, when you come into a company and like you figure out, okay, here's the AI side of it, but the task side or the job side, how do you identify what should be, how do you identify the gap of how AI can
Sure.
fit? Like, what are the questions you look for? What's the things you ask? Like, how do you know that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess the first thing is just kind of first kind of understanding what their business is. Like, what do they
Mhm.
do? What do they do in a broad sense? And then what do you do a day to accomplish that? And then we go into kind of, um, where are the gaps that you have now? Because, some of the smaller businesses, they've got people that are kind of doing multiple jobs because they can't just hire as many. They don't have the cash that some of
Right.
these companies do. And so sometimes you find out that, they've got five, 5 or 10 people, but they're all doing the job of 3 people each or something like that. And so then you can kind of go through and identify, all right, what would be the most helpful as far as productivity goes? Like if we could get something off your plate, what's the best thing to do? And then you kind of
Right.
go that way and you can solve those, figure out what to implement first, if you will. Okay, now we can tackle this, then after that we can go on to this problem.
Do you have any like frameworks you like to use when it comes to some sort of gap analysis and say, okay, I always know I want to ask these questions or whatever set? Like, does anything come to mind? You're like, I always ask this question to everybody and I never know what the answer is going to be.
Yeah, well, the first question that I always ask is a very broad one, and it usually gives me a different answer every time. It's just, okay, what do you guys do? What does your business do? You know, and then from there, I'll go, okay, and what's the goal? Are we, are we just looking to do it better? Are we looking to, add different domains or functions or, different things that you're doing?
Yeah.
Or, you know, or are we just simply streamlining the business, trying to cut costs? What's the goal here? And then from there, that usually takes me in, you know, different directions each
Right.
time, because what I like to do is just start real broad to where they can start talking, open-ended questions. And then I'll start to, you know, probe and hone down. Okay, what does that mean to you? What does that look like to you? Why is that important? Those types of questions, really trying to understand where we're going. That's a big one, I guess I would say. Following up once you get in there, what does that mean to you? What does it look like to you? Whatever. And why is that important? Those two
Right.
are really big ones once you kind of get past and figure out what we're trying to tackle.
Do you ever get to a point when you know they whatever that problem might be that you ever find yourself saying some random tool like Reggie AI or some basic, you're just like, guys, you don't need anything complex, just use this tool and you're fine. You don't need me.
Oh,
You ever,
absolutely.
yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
When's the difference for you? Like when's the stuff you're like, okay, I can jump into this as meaty versus saying just go use ChatGPT. You don't need me for this.
Yeah, that's a good question. It kind of there's a few things. One, it's the foundation and the goal kind of. So for
Hmm.
example, sometimes the goal may be, continuously implementing solutions to get to an end goal, but we're starting with, say, a ChatGPT plugin or something like that.
Right.
In that case, if they have a plan or they have a strategy and a goal and a budget, they're a large enough company that they can actually afford to, accomplish this plan. Then, then it makes sense, even if, the first thing is going to be like a chat GPT plugin. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes though, yeah, it's like, especially with some of the smaller companies that they, you know, their data is not stored properly, and
Right.
it's going to be a real big undertaking that's going to cost more money than it's going to be worth for them. That's kind of more so when I would say, you know, I, if I were you guys, I would probably just, use this type of plugin or use this or whatever,
Right.
you know, because now you're talking, you're going to end up spending way more money than you're ever going to get in benefit just based on what that
Right.
company does, So
Super interesting. Well, last question for you, and we're almost at time. I want to make sure that you don't take too much of your time. I get asked these questions all day,
sure,
just.
sure.
But with all the stuff coming out, like Sora and GPT-5 around the corner and all this other stuff coming out, what are some of the trends you see coming not only for the bigger models, but like what you're doing, building your own model? What are you seeing coming in the future as an impact of that?
Yeah, so what we've been seeing a lot lately, and I think it's going to continue, is like building AI autonomous agents to as well as what I mentioned earlier, retrieval augmented generation. That's becoming, adding those types of things. I haven't worked a lot with zero shot learning, but that's a pretty new one. I think that's going to be a big deal. So what that
Yeah.
does, it allows a model quickly work with some data that it hasn't been trained on. So if something comes up
Right.
that it hasn't been trained on, zero shot learning is able to help it quickly identify and start understanding that. I haven't worked a lot with it, so I I haven't don't have a lot of experience to say, these are the things you have to worry about with it and stuff like that. But it does appear that it could, substantially help in the future. So I think those are going to be kind of some of the bigger things going forward. But this is going to continue to grow, and the advancements are going to continue very quickly. You
Yeah.
know,
So
they're
going into
starting to slow down a little bit as
right.
far as the advances themselves, but in general, over time, there's a lot that's going to be coming in and changing, you know.
What do you think like you're talking about the augmented generation, something you said like
Yeah,
that, and then zero shot learning, all this other stuff. Like, what's the impact on business for that? Why would that matter for someone to know if that's coming? Why did that help them?
great question. So, well, retrieval augmented generation is already kind of here. They're both here. They're just newer advances.
Yeah.
So, with retrieval augmented generation, it's going to allow businesses to give better service, more personalized service using their own business documents and information, right?
Yeah.
Now, again, there's a risk to that also. So it could provide big benefit, but you also have to mitigate the risk. The risk is,
Right.
like we were talking, if the data is not good data, it's
Right.
garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah.
If the data is not good, it's just going to continue to make it worse. And so you really have to be careful before you implement something like that. If you've got everything set up, all your ducks in a row, and you add that, it's going to be a much better experience for customers. Zero shot learning would be similar in the sense that, it would be able to more quickly classify things that it hadn't been trained on. Now, the risk with that is with that one, excuse me, you're going to need to closely monitor that to make sure that, it's not getting things out of whack and stuff,
Right.
make sure that it's correct and that it doesn't, you don't miss that it made a mistake and you don't correct it and stuff like that.
Right.
So, but yeah, those things are definitely definitely give the ability to improve service from a business standpoint,
Yeah.
specifically in like chatbots. This is,
Right.
you know, so those are some things that are big, and there's going to be a lot more coming.
Yeah. Where we're going is fascinating, both terrifying and also exciting at the same time, but I appreciate this has been, I could literally probably ask you a bajillion questions. But this has been awesome. So if people want to find you, it's unified-software-ai.com. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll put the website in the show notes and wherever else we have you. So if anyone has questions around actually building something, he's the
Yeah.
guy. And I'm
And
literally going to send people to you. So like ask me, I'm like, I don't
okay.
know, ask Timothy. I don't know what we're doing. I can tell you how to use it. I don't know how to build it, but
You can also, anyone can add me on LinkedIn as well. I use
yeah,
that as well. So
awesome. Love it. Well, I'm excited. And when you launch your new AI, would you have any idea when you're launching your own model?
good question. So we're going through fundraising right now. Once we finish that, it should be about 6 months before we launch an MVP. Now, this is the target market is underserved populations. So populations that don't typically get the mentorship and advice that we were giving when I was working at Morgan Stanley and Merrill Lynch and JP Morgan
Right.
and things like that,
Right.
that combine, taking into account your education, your career, your health, and your finances to create a comprehensive plan to help you accomplish your goals. And so, yeah, these will be pretty much all underserved populations that don't have this, mentorship to help them, guide them through the education they need to get, or want to get the career that they want to get, the financial goals that they want. Now
Right.
this is not designed to, like, when I say financial goals, this is not telling you how to trade stocks or anything. That's not
Right.
what this is going to do. And
Yeah.
the same thing with the healthcare. This is not going to diagnose anything or anything like that. So it's simply advice to help people get where they're going without making as many mistakes, hopefully.
That's awesome. I'm excited. Well, when you're ready, I got beta testers. Come talk to me. I'd love to see what I can do to possibly break it,
Perfect.
but just use it. Sounds awesome. So that's
Perfect.
great. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, Timothy, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. I'll make sure we blast out all the information about you. And like, I'm not kidding. I'm gonna send people to you and they ask me these questions. I'm like, I don't know, but Timothy's the man. Ask him.
Yeah, sounds great.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the GTM AI Podcast. Please follow, subscribe, like, comment, and come back for more.